Okay, in this video, I'm going to give you some ideas on how to figure out what you should be charging, how to figure out if you need to raise prices, and if you need to raise prices, how to think about that process. All right, let's take a look at my spreadsheet and I'll help you make sense of this. So don't get caught up in this just yet, but here over on the top right, I got a bunch of questions that essentially get answered in this video. So rather than read those right now, let's talk about a concept. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. Preface. I'm going to use an example of serving smaller property types. You might be serving large property types, and so this will differ for you a bit. I need to pick something to use it as an example. Maybe this isn't perfect for your business. Maybe some of these services that I use are not perfect examples. Extrapolate from this and imagine how it applies to your business, okay? So we could use lawn mowing. We could use fertilization weed control, year-long ant treatments, aeration, grub treatments. I could go down a list of services that everything I'm talking about right here will work for. So let's just, let me set up the example, okay? So you've got a property that is gross lot. In my example, this could be turf, it could be whatever, but we're going to use gross lot square footage as an example, and we're going to use mowing. But this 100% applies to fertilization weed control and other services. In those cases, you'd be using most likely turf square footage. All right, so I'm using gross lot square footage, and we're going with it's a property of 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, property of 7,000, 8,000 square feet. We've broken it down into 1,000 square foot increments, okay? And this is the dollar amount that we charge. So if it's 6 to 7,000 square feet, we charge $29. If it's 7 to 8,000, we charge $30. If it's 8 to 9, we charge 30. You get the idea. You can kind of see down the screen. Don't go copy this pricing. This is just an example that I made up for the sake of a spreadsheet, all right? All right, so now here's how you start to understand your business. So maybe you're new in business, you're like, hey, I don't know what to charge. Some of the process is going to be just simply asking other individuals, what do you charge? You're trying to figure out what the market will pay. And then as soon as and that just gets you started, and then you've got to immediately start tracking your data. Everyone has to track their data. If you're not tracking your data, you're in a bad spot. And so here's what tracking data looks like. Every time someone pulls a tech or an individual, a crew member, a team, they pull up to the property, they turn off the ignition, they need to write down their start time, or they need to click start on their mobile device if you're using something like Service Autopilot. That clocks you in and starts recording the time. As soon as they finish the property, they need to write down their stop time. So this would be when they turn back on the ignition to leave. So when they turn on the ignition to leave, because maybe they had to write some notes, maybe they had to write something on a sheet of paper or on a flyer or something that's a leave behind that goes on the door to the client, that's all part of doing the job. So when that's done, they turn on the ignition to leave, they write down the stop time, okay? So what happens is you accumulate, or they click stop on their mobile device that clocks them out and records this time and tracks that time back to that person, back to that crew, back to that job, back to that day, back to that everything, all right? So you start accumulating this data. And this data is incredibly important. So even if you don't use a mobile system, or even if you don't use something like Service Autopilot, you have to start recording this data for every single job, every single day, for every single service type. So what happens is, once you start accumulating this data, you can figure out where the problems are in your pricing model. You can figure out which clients are underperforming. You can figure out which services are better than other services, and I'll explain. So let's look at the data. So let's imagine that we accumulated just a small amount of data. And so here are 4 records. Here's 4 data points. These are 4 different jobs. All right, so this job started at 9:12 a.m., ended at 9:25. There was 13 minutes of physical time on the property. This one was from 9:44 to 10:02. There are 18 physical minutes on the property. Okay, you can see that. Then the crew size, and you can run a 1-man crew, a 2-man crew, 3-man crew, doesn't matter. I use 3 for my example. 2-man crews are fantastic. 3 is usually, it's too much to tell you, but 2 is usually better than 3, but 3 works for certain types of companies. All right, so let's just go with 3-man to make my example. So there's 13 physical minutes on the property. The truck pulled up, turned off the ignition. The crew of 3 worked, got back in the truck, turned on the ignition, drove away. That whole process took 13 minutes. Unload the equipment, do the work, put the equipment back in the truck, leave. 13 minutes physical time. But there were 3 people on the property. Those 3 people together incurred 39 minutes of work. 13 times 3, 39 minutes, okay? So now we we break that down. You can look at my formulas kind of up at the top of the screen here if you want to copy and build this spreadsheet for yourself. You just pause the video. So basically, we're taking this, we're basically taking this 39 minutes and we're converting it so that's in 60-minute chunks. So we're dividing 39 by 60 minutes. So it's 0.65 of 1 hour. Okay, so it's 0.65. This was 0.9 of 1 hour. This job took 0.95 of 1 hour. Okay, if you equalize it out across the number of men. We were charging $30. So remember, this is property with 7,000, 8,000 square feet. We look at our pricing matrix here, 7,000, 8,000 square feet, it's 30 bucks. So this job charged out at $30. That's what you charged, assuming you're charging your client the rate that you are selling work at currently. And so then if we do the math, and so we go to this box, you can look at my formula. I divided this column, the price divided by the time, and I got 46 a man hour. So that what that means is that the individual is making the equivalent of $46 per man hour when they're producing work, all right? It doesn't account for overhead. It doesn't account for drive time. It doesn't account for load time. It doesn't account for breaks. It doesn't count. We are only looking at, are we making money while we're at the job site? So when they're working, they're making the equivalent of $46 a man hour. It doesn't mean for the day that they're going to make 46 an hour, because for right after they finish this job, they might drive for 5 minutes. They didn't make any money during that 5 minutes. So if you average the total time for the day, it's going to drive down this $46 an hour because there was all this non-productive time within the day. But the goal is to figure out a way to look at all of your properties and understand by job. Forget drive time. I'm not saying drive time doesn't matter, but forget it in this scenario. Just say, is my property profitable when my team is on the property? Okay. We could talk forever about how to think about drive time, but all we're focusing on for the sake of this video is it actually even profitable work when I'm there? If you can't make the work profitable when you're on the job site, then it's really bad when you factor in drive time and all the non-productive time. So we got to at least get this right. That stuff doesn't matter if you can't make this right. So focus on this piece. So you might say to yourself, $46 a man hour is great. And looking at the data based on your average, it is. So this job averaged 33 a man hour. This one averaged 32 a man hour. This one averaged 40 a man hour. So if this was a representation of all your data across days and weeks for the service of mowing, you'd be making an average of $38 a man hour. Is that enough? Now, there are other things that you have to figure out, like what's your break-even point, considering cost of goods sold and overhead and things of that sort. We're not going down that road, but that would help you understand if $38 an hour makes sense. You might know that on average you pay your guys, your team, $14 an hour, and you have very low overhead. If that's the case, then this $38 is probably going to work for you. Generally, you want to see this number in the 40s or greater. That's my general rule of thumb. In commercial, you'll see this number be lower. In residential, this number can be higher. That's not really what the video is about. The video is that now we're starting to understand our data. And I'm now getting an understanding of, on average, for a 7,000 to 8,000 square foot lot, I make 38 bucks when I'm mowing. Or it could be that you are looking at 6,000 to 7,000 square foot lots and you find out you make on average $39 a square foot. Or this would be scary. Let's say you're looking at the average of all your lots that you mow for that are 15,000 to 16,000 square feet. You're only making $21 a man hour. You're getting killed and you're charging $45. And you already thought, man, $45 an hour, I'm charging a lot for that. And or some clients are already saying, oh my gosh, $45 an hour or $45 to mow the lawn is a lot. And you're hearing that, so you're thinking you're charging too much. But when you look at the data, you're getting destroyed. You might as well get out of this work. You might as well fire all those clients. And so you've got to fix that, and you've got to find a way to fix that amount. Okay. And so if you wanted to fix that, let me give you an example. If you had a spreadsheet like that, all right, let's say that you decided you were comfortable at $40 a man hour. All right, so how could you fix that? You could play with the data here as an example. So what would happen if we took that price to 50? We'd make 24, 70. Oh my goodness, you got to get up to what? I mean, again, this is just for the sake of an example, but now I've got to get this job up to, if a job like this is going to take us 126 man minutes, basically 2.1 hours of total on-site time. So I've got 3 individuals on the property for 42 minutes each. 42 minutes times 3, we're there for just over 2 hours to 2.1 hours. If I want to make $43 a man hour, then I've got to be charging $90 an hour. or $90 to do this job. That's the only way I can make this profitable. Now, I'm looking at one data point for a 15 to 16,000 square foot lot. I'm throwing a lot at you. You have to extrapolate from this. I'm giving you a concept. But the beauty is when you collect a lot of data, you could have weeks and months and years of averages to figure out what you're making. And then you can look back and say, like, for example, let's plot this 38 bucks next to 7 or 8,000 square feet. Let's say that's what you're making on average. Let's say when you looked at the data, it was something like this. You know, again, I don't want to take too long here. Let's just say it looked something like this. And by the time you get down here, your average is $21 a man hour. You can start to see where your sweet spot is. My sweet spot is at 7 to 8,000 gross lot square feet. That's where my sweet spot's at 6 to 7. And everything you can do this with fertilization, weed control, everything. So then you can start to extrapolate, okay, what would I need to change my pricing to get my 7 to 8,000 square foot lots up to 40? Maybe it needs to go to 31. You know, and you'll have to run that calculation. You can play with some of the data if you put in a spreadsheet. You can back into it and you can figure out what you need to price at to get to that point. So I could talk about this for another hour, and I'd be happy to expand on this concept if you want to comment below and give me some ideas, because I think this is one of the most important concepts you can be thinking about. But let's look at the data one more time, and I'll add a couple more points. So again, you're starting to see, what can I tell from this data? So just looking at these 4 records right here, if my average is 38, then I immediately know, like, let's just say this is Miss Jones and this is Mr. Smith, all right? So Mr. Smith and Miss Jones are underperforming the average. So I either need to figure out what's wrong at this property. Is it a crew? Is my crew running slow that does this work? Like maybe, so, you know, the other data, this is all data that something like a service autopilot would report. Maybe this is crew 1, this is crew 2, and this is crew 1. Well, isn't that interesting if that's what you're seeing in your data? These are called job costing reports. In Service Autopilot, we've got 2 of these, plus you can build custom job costing reports. And they're looking and they're focusing at labor. We're predominantly focusing on labor here. We're not focusing on material cost in this. We're focusing on labor. The reason that matters, and everybody's got an opinion on this, but my opinion is the reason it matters is labor is the biggest line item on your profit and loss. If you can't get your labor ratio correct, and you can't get labor right, nothing else you do inside your company will fix your numbers. The number one thing you've got to fix is labor. If you fix that, then you can make an improvement. If you still got a problem, then you go look at materials, you look at product cost, you look at other factors. But if you can optimize product cost, you can optimize non-billable time, you can work on your overhead. And if your labor ratio is out of whack and you're not getting paid enough for the amount of time they're on the job and for the amount you're paying your team to do the work, nothing else you do external to that will fix your problems. So you start here. This is the number one place to start. So again, going back to the data, what's it telling me? It's like, well, this is really interesting. Crew 2 seems to have the underperforming per man hour jobs. So what do? You talk to this crew. You talk to them like, hey, what's going on? You go shadow them. You go out and train them in the field. You go out and watch them and time them, look for inefficiencies. Or maybe there is no scenario, like maybe there is nothing about crew 2 that's underperforming crew 1. So what's that tell you? Well, maybe this Miss Smith job has a problem. Like this is a small residential property. Maybe they got a trampoline. Maybe they built a playhouse in the backyard. Maybe they're tearing down the fence right now and installing a new fence. So all of a sudden the job times have dropped. In a good system, software system, you could take this data right here. You could click a couple buttons, say, okay, now show me what has happened for Mr. Smith mowing for the last 2 months. This $32 a man hour we made this week was an anomaly. We normally make 44. Something's up. And you can ask the crew. You can talk to the crew. There's so much information you can derive from this. You can see which clients are being underpriced, maybe which crews are underperforming. I can just go on and on. And then once you start to find trends and you figure out which are your best, like you could take all this data and you could contrast this to, say, fertilization weed control. And you might find on the same type of property for fertilization weed control, you're making $65 a man hour, whereas you're making 40 a man hour mowing. And maybe when you're doing pest control, you're making 80 a man hour. And maybe when you're doing hand weeding and trimming bushes, you're making 34 a man hour. Well, this starts to now give you some clues on where you grow the business. Where do you double down? What do you market? All those kind of things. You might look at some of this data by geography. Like in this neighborhood, we're making $40 an hour. In these other neighborhoods, we're making 46 a man hour. Why? What's the difference? Okay, maybe we need to focus on these neighborhoods. There's so much data here. So if you've got to find a way to start tracking this, and then you have to have analysis over top of this. And if you're interested, so I'm going to leave it at that, put questions down below, say, hey, I'd like you to someday elaborate on this point, or could you better explain that? Or you were talking so fast, I didn't understand this thing you mentioned. Tell me what those things are. I'll make a list of those, and over time I'll record some more videos, because this is frankly the thing that's getting a lot of individuals in trouble. So that's all I got for you. If you're interested, you can stick around. I'll show you how I use Service Autopilot to get all this data every single day inside my company. Thanks a lot. I'll make this quick. I'm going to show you how I look at this data inside Service Autopilot. If this is something that is of interest to you, tell me in the comments and I can give you more examples like this. So what you're looking at is a dispatch board. This dispatch board shows me every day exactly what needs to be done by crew, by technician, and it automatically figures it out. So on this day, I had 10 jobs. The jobs are in the order that they should be driven and performed. This is the route order. Now this is historical data, and then I'm looking back at a previous day. So if you'll notice a couple things, these were the jobs that were supposed to be done. And then over here, and I'm not going to explain this in detail, here are the times. So this job took from 8:01 to 8:12. This crew had 3 individuals working the crew. So the total time was calculated. This time that you're looking at, the 8:01 to 8:12, probably came in from a mobile device, meaning someone would click start, and when they were done, they'd click stop on a mobile device, automatically logged all the time. However, if you don't use a mobile device, you can simply click and just tab through here and data punch the data, and that way you have a permanent record of it. The reason I show you this is because the permanent record is unbelievably invaluable, extremely valuable, in that you can go to something like this. So here is a job cost report inside Service Autopilot. We have all kinds of reports. We have dashboards. We have all types of reports. You can create your own reports, create your own dashboards. There's something you can imagine, there's a good chance you can put it together. So I'm looking at the data. I'm looking at a job cost report for the 20th, which was the exact same time period for the work that was performed. And in my example, we just had 10 jobs. I can look at this, and so these jobs were all lawn mowing jobs. I can look and I can see I was making $40 an hour on average when we were working the jobs. Now, if I look at the data and I have it sorted by target over under, basically inside Service Autopilot, we can set a target, meaning a goal. I want to make $45 an hour mowing. I want to make $72 an hour on fertilization weed control. I want to make $64 an hour in aeration. I want to make $81 an hour on pest control. Whatever your services are that you offer, you can tell the system, this is my goal. And the system will show you daily how you're doing against your goal, by crew, by job, by service type. And a service type would be like lawn mowing or aeration. So without going into great detail, I can simply scan this report every day at the end of the day or the next morning, and I can scan down this report and I can see anything that's negative. So anything in parentheses that represents negative, it's negative in the sense that I underachieved my target. So for example, I had a target of, if you look right here, I had a target of $45 a man hour for lawn mowing. We generated $28.07 a man hour while we were on the property. That means the time it took an actual amount of time of 1 hour and, well, you can see 1.14. All right. So the point here is that when you do the math and the report does all the math for you, it determined that you were making an average of, or on this property, you're making $28.07 while you were there. But the goal was 45, so we underperformed by $16.93. So from this, I can now do a couple things. I can look at this and say, okay, I'm either underpricing this job or something is wrong with the property, meaning that, is there an issue? I can talk to the crew. I can then go back in, and I'm not going to do it for the sake of time, but I can go back in and I can then drill in and I can filter this report and I can say, give me all the mowing for James Smith for last year or this year or the last 2 months. Was this $28.07 that we're generating per man hour, was that an anomaly? Or meaning that something changed this past week? Or is this an ongoing issue? And from this, I can then conclude that I either need to raise the price or I can talk to the client, and whatever the thing was that created the anomaly that slowed down the property, like for example, maybe they added a trampoline to the property or something else is going on, or maybe they're building a fence and that's going to last a couple weeks. We're just going to eat it. I won't deal with that. But if there's something up, I know simply by looking at the data. That's all I have to do is look at it once a day and I know how I'm doing. The other thing, by collecting this data, I can start to learn my pricing. And I gave some examples of that earlier in the video, and I'll do another video on this. But I can, on reports like this, I can see what the square footage is. So sort of ignore the 4 decimal positions, but this is 8,118 square feet. This one's 8,459. I can see all of that data. I can look at what my average pricing is for 7,000 square foot lawns versus 8,000 versus 9,000 square foot lawns. And back to my example, figure out where my sweet spot is. Figure out if there's a certain square footage size, like 10 to 11,000 square feet, that I'm underpricing. Or maybe my sweet spot 7 to 8,000 and 8,000 to 9,000. I want to figure out what neighborhoods have tons of those properties and go get lots more of those. And then once I see this data and once I do just a little bit of analysis, and I know it might feel like it's a fair bit of work, but this is the magic. This is how you figure out how to price. All you have to see is the data. You can figure out where you have weak spots in your pricing model, and then you can learn from the data, and then you can go up your pricing. So you'll have confidence to now price, say, 10 to 11,000 square feet, work at $4 more than you used to sell it, because you know that's exactly what you have to do if you want to run a profitable business. So this data tells you exactly how to price. So you might say to yourself, I have no idea how to price. I don't know how to set my prices. Do the work, collect the data for a period of time, and then you'll know. And also, you get so busy, you're not able to run around out in the field and spot check work, and you're not able to do all of that. There's too much going on. You can simply watch this number every single week, and you can figure out where you have problems. There's so much more I could tell you about this. There's so much more data I could even add to this report. That's the idea of job costing. If you're not doing it, you are getting outmaneuvered by your competition because they know how to price and they're pricing strategically, and therefore they're making more profit. And as a result, they're able to hire better people. They have less debt. They're making more money to reinvest in marketing. They're growing faster than you, and it's a compounding cycle, and they win the game. And that's why companies don't understand why they're losing, why it never gets better. Maybe they don't usually realize they're getting crushed. They just don't understand why everything's not getting that much better. It's because someone else is figuring out the game, and they're sucking up the business. They're getting the best people. They are winning because they know the math. They know the data. When you have a system like this, it can tell you all that data. All you have to do is understand how to look at it and make a few decisions. And that's why I'm doing these videos. So if you're interested in Service Autopilot, go check it out. If you want more of this, let me know in the comments, and I will happily tell you more. Thanks a lot.